Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Women in Insurance Data Insights Driving Change webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to make two announcements. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed via email, along with slides from the presentation and a related infographic later this week. It will also be available for download on the Women Insurance website, which is www.accord.com/WII. Second, there will be a question and answer section at the end of this call. You can submit questions at any time by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. Leslie?
Hello, everyone. It is Leslie Cruz here, CEO of STEMconnector and Million Women Mentors. As many of you know, STEMconnector represents a network of pioneering leaders across corporate, post-secondary, nonprofit, and K-12 sectors who are all working together to grow a much more diverse, robust, and sustainable STEM talent workforce. We launched Million Women Mentors in 2014 in an effort to encourage and to inspire girls and young women to pursue, to persist, and to succeed in careers and leadership roles, leveraging the power of mentoring. When we started, there were about 6 companies that sat around a table that all looked at each other and said, independently, we are doing great work. But what more could we achieve if we worked together and banded together under the same umbrella? And that is how Million Women Mentors started. Through the work of this national and increasingly global movement, 5 years later, I'm thrilled to say that over 2.3 million girls and young women have been paired with mentors. And it was working together, collaboration across boardrooms, across classrooms, and across communities that helped us get there. This collaboration continues to be alive and well at Million Women Mentors and is so very evident in the Women in Insurance work. We are so proud of this Women in Insurance initiative and the extraordinary group of leaders who are driving its work forward. It's your leadership, it's your commitment, it's your expertise. And I think it's fair to say, with over 350 guests joining us on today's call today, it is clear that this is both a business and a social imperative to do more for women in the insurance industry. And with that, I am so very pleased to pass it over to the Women in Insurance fearless leader, a managing director at the Jacobson Group, Margaret Milkint.
And thank you, Million Women Mentors STEMconnector. The insurance community is so honored, delighted, and proud to serve alongside of you. And we are quite excited about this day. We intend to make a bit of history. It's my pleasure to introduce you all to the Women in Insurance Initiative and our mission. We are truly a force for good, for action, and for change. We were created to bring STEM to the insurance industry, and that's what we've been busy doing. We are a group of very action-oriented leaders, very focused, extremely driven, and we really decided to focus on committee work, working groups coming together to create change, to move from the talk track to the action track. So we have 4 active committees: the Innovation Committee, the Communications Committee, the State's Mentoring Committee, and last but not least, the Data Initiative Committee. Today, we are putting the very, very big, bright spotlight on data and our Data Initiative Committee. And we are very, very proud to have reached this milestone day. I want to take a moment to highlight and to shout out our 2020 consortium members. Without their tireless leadership, we would not be 350 strong on this webinar today. So a big thank you to ACLI, the Actuarial Foundation, Accord, Country Financial, the Jacobson Group, Luther Pendragon, MEMIC, Nunery, NFP, Prudential, Ryan Specialty Group, and Verisk. It is my honor now to turn the baton to my treasured friend, colleague, and founding consortium member, our dynamic, Catherine Lamson, Senior VP, Chief Administrative Officer of MEMIC. Catherine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here and to be able to tell you a little bit about our data initiative. It's been an exciting journey to be on. The data initiative background really started in 2019. Our data collection was designed to measure and provide insights into the issues and the opportunities that currently exist for women in the insurance industry. We've tried to align ourselves to review the issues that are currently in our workplace and provide the insight and opportunities that might be available once the current environment becomes more evident. The survey asked companies to share information about employee demographics, base salaries, corporate roles, and the gender parity initiatives that may be taking place in the various organizations. This was the first time for many of the organizations that these questions were asked. Data was aggregated to provide a comprehensive look at the drivers of inequity and to look at areas for improvement within our industry. Preliminary study findings showed us that 100% of the respondent companies reported that they employ more women than men in their organizations. I'm sure some of you look around and know that to be a fact. Findings showed a noticeable difference in women being employed in senior roles compared to men. And we'll go over that in a few minutes. Findings also showed that fewer females were in senior corporate roles. The survey also showed that as corporate roles progress, the pay disparity between men and women begins to increase. Ethnicity as a factor also points to a similar pay disparity throughout defined groups with very slight variations. Now, to take us through the survey, I'd like to introduce my colleague and great friend, Barbara Ingraham. Barbara is the Managing Director of Excess and Surplus at Verisk, and we were so proud to have Barbara join the group and lead this data initiative. Barbara?
Thanks, Catherine. As Catherine shared, we at Verisk were the ones who collected the data and did the analysis. So we're very pleased to be able to provide this level of insight to the industry. As already has been mentioned, there are more women than men being employed in the insurance industry. It is 55 to 45%, so it's not insignificant. On the next slide, we see, here's what it looks like. What does, how many women are there as you progress through the corporate ranks? So looking at this slide, what we can see on the left is we have part-times and interns moving through non-professional managers, other levels of management up to senior leader and CEO. Men are in blue and women are in orange. And as you can see, there's a distinct inflection point at the middle of this graph. So naturally in the part-time intern space, you might expect that there would be more women. Women will often ask for part-time roles at various points in their career. So that's not necessarily surprising. At non-manager professional, we still have a significant disparity of 65% to 35%. At entry-level manager, women are still doing better than men very slightly in the insurance industry. Those of you who follow the Wall Street Journal and the leanin.org group that they put the surveys out every October, this year the big finding was that women fail to make that first jump into management. And insurance, that's still happening. Where it breaks down is where you get to managers of managers. And that's where the men start to take over. And as you go through the chart, you can see that by the time we get to the CEO level, it's really quite lopsided. So on our next slide, we're looking at the same information from a salary standpoint. So we have everything broken into buckets. If you look at the bucket on the left, under 40,000, that might reasonably coincide with the interns and part-time workers. And women are more highly represented in that group. But once again, in the middle of this chart, you get the big inflection point where the men start to take the lead and have are much more highly represented. And for the group as a whole, that inflection point is in the $100,000 to $120,000 range, the salary range. And as that, to me, that big X is very, very significant. As soon as the women's numbers start to drop off, it seems to compound from there. So on the next slide, yes, there's a lot going on this slide, so let me try to explain it to you because we think it's important. So we broke down the salary buckets into 4 groupings. So the lower salary buckets are on the left, under 60,000, and the higher salary buckets are on the right, over 180,000. And then we looked at the range of titles for men and women inside each group. So on the left, you can see at the lower salary levels, except at the CEO point, there seem to be a fair number of women represented. It's a little noisy. You don't see that stark difference that you saw in the last graph. In the next grouping, the $60,000 to $120,000 group, you see the women's representation seems to reflect the overall trends. But let's jump all the way over to the right. When we get into 180,000 in salary and above, what you're seeing is that men are way outnumber women in those salary groupings. And so this implies that even when you factor in the corporate role, that women are being paid less than men in these more senior positions. So with that, I'll hand it back to Catherine to talk a little bit about the tenure.
Thanks, Barbara. Well, as you can see on this slide, women are represented in orange, and you'll see that there are definitely more women in each age category in our industry. There are increasing percentages of women in all of the latter buckets, which implies that women generally stay in the workforce longer. The study also shows that studies have shown that women live longer than men, and that could be an indicator of why there are more women at older ages. Maybe they're saving for retirement. When women earn less than men, certainly they're going to stay in the workforce longer. Interesting to note, at age 75, that starts to change. And I guess I would ask that we think about, why would that be? Are women leaving the workforce? Are men getting back into the workforce? Something to ponder and something to explore in the future. On the next slide, you'll see women by tenure. According to the data, women tend to stay at a company for longer periods of time than men. Does this imply that women are more loyal? Do men change jobs more often than women? And now, those are the things that we want to think about as we move into the future and look at additional survey data. And now back to Margaret Milkint, the chair of the Million Women Mentors Women in Insurance Initiative.
Thanks, Catherine. We're going to focus on the next two slides on representation of gender by ethnicity and corporate role. During our data study, we did look at multiple ethnicities, and across most groups, the trends were aligned with those of the broader group, as we've shown earlier, except in one very important case, and that is in the case of the African American group. So this slide is going to focus on the African American group versus the white men, white women group. So let's take a look at the first graph on the left. And here we have the X pattern again that Barbara talked about, and I call it the haunting X, because we do see that there is a shift, at the cross between men and women. White men in the blue, white women in the orange. Now let's move over to the slide on the right. This is a focus on the African American men in the blue and the African American women in the orange. It is very interesting and positive that we do see African American women doing better at that grouping of manager of entry-level manager with middle manager. That is a significant inflection point and certainly something to really celebrate and to monitor. So we're watching, and you're going to hear more later in this presentation from Dr. Nunery, who will speak to these points as well. Overall, this is a very encouraging trend, and we're just going to watch this one. So let's move to the next slide. And let's take a look at ethnicity and base salary. So, as you can see on the slide on the top, we're focused here. The white men this time are in orange and the white women are in blue. We see that according to the data, the inflection point varies across ethnicities, but the overall trend line remains the same. Taking a look below at African American men in the orange and African American women in the blue, we can see that the African American women are holding their own throughout the pay scale. So it is, again, positive to see this trend. And taking a look at, let's look at start in the middle at the $100,000 range, where African American women are at 66%. They're staying very, very high at 59% in the 120 to 139 range. Again, strong 140 to almost 160. We don't see the shift until 160,000 to 179.99. That is very positive. Just have your eye go up and look at white women and white men at that same inflection point. Very, very interesting, very positive, and I have a smile on my face. So let's move on to the next slide. And here we want to talk about some gender parity initiatives. And I think these are some very critical data points and stats as takeaways for all of us leaving this webinar. So just highlighting the big numbers, 78% of our responding companies noted that there is a lack of set and published internal targets for gender diversity. 61% of our responding companies that do set published targets for gender diversity noted that progress against these targets is not, and I'm going to repeat, not published. 56% of our responding companies noted that their organization does have an appointed executive member that is responsible, accountable for D&I. That's terrific. And I know we can do better. And last, 94% of companies reported having a clear procedure in place for reporting those inappropriate or discriminatory behaviors. Let's move to the next slide. So this is a summary slide. There's a lot here, and again, a takeaway for all of you to share with your communities, networks, ERGs. But our big headline is that the data is clearly pointing to notable differences between men and women in age, tenure, corporate role, and base salary. We're really excited about being able to present our tenure findings because we haven't seen that. And as Catherine mentioned earlier, this is an area that we want to continue to delve into further. Data does show that women appear to be working longer, implying loyalty to their organizations or the fact that they are funding those retirement accounts. It does show a lack of progression regarding corporate role and base salary pay. We do see that women tend to occupy the lower corporate levels and progress to the first managerial level well, but fewer women climb the ladder to the next managerial level. We know that women are the majority in the lower salary ranges with the inflection point at $100,000 base salary. And then focusing on ethnicity. Ethnicity data shows slight variations between men and women in progression throughout their careers. The downward trend for women in pay and corporate role continues, with the bright light on African American women. We do want to note that the Journey study by Dr. Leroy Nunery does support the ethnicity findings of our 2019 WII data study. Racial and ethnicity advancements must remain a priority while celebrating and amplifying the strides, all the strides we're making, especially by African Americans in insurance. And now it is my great pleasure to pass the baton over to Dr. Leroy Nunery. He is founder and principal of PlūsUltré. And Dr. Nunery, we are honored to have you join us and to help us amplify. Dr. Nunery.
Thank you, Margaret. The honor is mine, believe me. This has been terrific to work with all of you as we prepared this webinar, and I hope that everyone on the line understands the importance of this work. Just in the next few minutes, we're going to talk about some comparisons, correlations, and parallels. And we'll have to click through the slides here. There we go. So the Journey of African American Insurance Professionals was commissioned by Marsh and sponsored by the National African American Insurance Association and published in 2018. And in comparison, the Women in Insurance study that you're hearing about today will show some parallels to what I found in my study. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of underrepresentation, African Americans are in C-suites, but under 4% represented, and that is senior most levels inside insurance companies, regardless of formation, either stock or mutual companies. And yet, the same low percentage is resident in the agency principals, under 5%. And of course, that ties to, let's go forward, to underrepresentation for senior women, senior leaders who are women in the WII study, only 29%. So we're seeing some parallels there. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of compensation, what I found was that a majority of those we surveyed, well over 300 people, were bunched in the $100,000 to $175,000 range. And as compensation is shown on Women in Insurance, there's a break point also at $100,000 to $120,000. So the glass ceiling has a personal financial implication as well as around career progress. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of tenure, what we found in the study was that 49% of the folks that we surveyed and interviewed had at least 20 years of experience. That's extraordinary. but participation overall has been flat when you look at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, looking at sales, claims, and customer service roles. And as we found in the Women in Insurance study, there's a high degree of loyalty and tenure with 62% at 20 years. And this seems to imply on both sides that there's a career immobility. There's a stagnation in terms of progress. There's plenty of years in, but not necessarily the progress going forward. Let's go to the next slide. This one area of career satisfaction and the following one that we'll look at is incredible, because when we asked if you were satisfied with your career trajectory, regardless of gender, there was a mix of being satisfied or very satisfied or dissatisfied and very dissatisfied, a real mixed bag. I think that is because, as we asked in other questions, many African Americans in the insurance business feel as though there is less room for them to make mistakes and that the obstacles seem to be greater for them than it is for other folks who are underrepresented. So while we're reporting in this study on women in insurance that there is a great progress, there is also a sense that talent isn't being fostered and promoted. And then when we look at barriers that seem to be the most prevalent, a lack of exposure, a lack of networks, a lack of experience are pointed out. Clearly, sponsorship and mentorship are pivotal. And yet we found, regardless of all of what would have been troubling or confounding, that 94% of those we surveyed and interviewed said they would gladly encourage somebody younger or behind them to come into the industry. That seems to tie back to tenure, that no matter what obstacles you face, there's a sense of persistence and perseverance that is resident within the industry. Let's go to the next slide. The barriers that you've already seen, as Margaret pointed out, that 78% of the companies in Women in Insurance study say that there are no internal targets, and that we're assuming sponsorship and mentorship are barriers and obstacles. And if we go to the next slide on communications, you'll see that the lack of communicating progress against goals also makes this difficult. So without targets that are clearly articulated around initiatives, around strategies, it's hard to conceive that diversity, equity, or inclusion will ever really be achieved. So we've got to gather all of this interesting and rich data and start to push the industry more towards getting the equity and the talent to succeed in the way that it can. Let's go to the next slide. You know, this month, we're in the midst of Black History Month and on the verge of March of Women's History Month. In 1932, there were 50 African-American owned insurance companies, predominantly mutuals. And what you see on the right side of the slide are pictures of the founders and some of the employees of North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance, formed in 1898, just some 30 years or so after the Civil War. What I want you to note is that the founders are in the background, and who's in front but those, in this case, 5 women, and then below, others who are working inside North Carolina Mutual. That says 2 things to me. One, we want to make sure that everyone understands that women have played a pivotal role in the formation not only of African-American insurance companies, but they are the backbone. The reason why those companies even existed and survived is because they were not only employees, but they were also customers. And so in terms of observations, I would say this. It's really important to highlight the strong historical linkages that there is between women's suffrage and civil rights. And that's why this conversation is poignant. That alliances and competition versus competition is important to recognize and call out. We've got to find language and position these discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion, not to say that we're pitting one group or segment against another, but rather that we can collectively find solutions that benefit all. that systematic change and systemic change is imperative. In order to come up with more studies and more strategies, we've got to find systemic solutions to systemic problems. Why is there stagnation? Why do salaries tail off? That's something that's going to require more study. And how do we encourage more young people who might look at this data and say, well, I'm not so sure my future is going to be great. If I go there, I'll peak out. How do we get them fired up and interested in coming into the industry? I think that means that we can be more creative than we've been. Pipeline development is essential, and that means that there's talent that we should be going after. Through NIRE, we're going after HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, to develop more of an interest. I think that's just one way that we can all work together. And then personal accountability is also important here. Most of the time, diversity programming is developed as a corporate responsibility, a program. But in order to really make this work, personal accountability has got to be the keystone. We've got to go beyond the corporate sense and into a personal accountability around what I as a manager or what I as an employee can do. And then lastly, the courageous conversations, not only in this month, Black History Month, or March, Women's History Month, but overall. These are difficult topics to address about inequity, underrepresentation, fairness, finding and giving voice. But if we take opportunities like this webinar, we can hold those courageous conversations and we can succeed. Thanks for your time, and Margaret, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nunery, for your thoughts, your wisdom, the sharing, and giving us a moment to pause, to reflect, and to celebrate. So as I said at the beginning of our conversation, we are all about action in the Women in Insurance Initiative. So coming off of this webinar, we are going to be sharing an infographic with all of you. My very, very simple ask is to share, to amplify, and to make this personal. As I like to say, this is a ground war. Your voice does matter. So please share this infographic with your networks, your community, your ERGs, with your friends, with your daughters, with your nieces, with your nephews. Please get the word out. I'm very happy to announce that we'll be doing some regional focus groups around the United States in Atlanta, Chicago, Maine, New York, New Jersey, and more. If you are interested in hosting for us a regional focus group, please let us know. We welcome you. We'll also be doing a podcast series. We're calling it The Data Difference, and we'll be focusing on insurance and STEM. And look for us on social media. We'll be blasting out the information, and that'll be coming to you soon. A big thanks to our friends at Insurance Nexus by Reuters Events. They will be hosting Women in Insurance sessions at their conferences in Chicago, starting in May at Insurance AI and Innovative Tech, Connected Claims in June, and Connected Insurance in November. We will be speakers, we will be panelists, we will be hosting focus groups, and we will be there in full force. So thank you, Insurance Nexus by Reuters. And finally, Data Initiative 2.0. We will be getting ready for our next data initiative. As we said at the beginning of this call, this is an inaugural journey, and it's a starting point. So thank you, all of you, for being our pioneers, for being our chorus of voices as we go forward, and we get ready for 2021. I also want to continue the thanks on the next slide. We have a wonderful chorus of friends and colleagues in the industry who are on the journey of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging with us. So a big thanks to APIW, Cultivar, Diamond, Gamma Iota Sigma, Insurance Careers Month, and yes, February is Insurance Careers Month. Celebrate the emerging talent that we so desperately need in our industry, and enjoy all of the events that ICM is bringing to us. Insurance Industry Charitable Foundation, Insurance Nexus by Reuters Events, Inspira Work, ISC Group, PlūsUltré, and Wing. Thank you all for your leadership, your courage, your heart as we move forward on the journey. And my last thanks to our 2020 consortium members. Without you, we would not be here today. And for anyone interested in joining our merry band, please reach out. We need you and we welcome you. And now I'm going to turn over to the amazing Amy Etten of STEMconnector Million Women Mentors. Amy?
Thank you so much, Margaret. It's time for the question and answer section of our webinar. We've already received a couple of great questions, and you should please feel free to continue to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask more questions. Please know that any questions we aren't able to address during this webinar will be addressed in our follow-up email. So to start, we have a question about whether the tenure data for women has to do with the fact that women are truly more loyal, or is it that they are afraid to change jobs as compared to men? There's a thought that men are less afraid to change jobs because it is perceived that men have more opportunity and that it would be less difficult for men to maintain their salary level at a new position. And similarly to that point, how do you attract senior level diverse women to relocate? Is there a fear for women to relocate, or are men more mobile due to social norms? So overall, these two questions are about whether women are truly loyal, whether they're afraid to move, and whether men are just more likely to move. I think we could really put this out to anyone in the group who feels comfortable offering a response.
This is Barbara. I will start. So one of the things that I suppose we should tell you about the data survey is that we did stick pretty much with data, actually asking factual questions and not getting so heavily into the opinions and perceptions part. So we don't have data on what drives the differences between men's and women's job changes at the senior level. And so I think it's just really, I think you've asked the question, do men have more opportunity, are women more afraid? I really think you change jobs when the opportunity seems right and it seems like that what's being offered to you is worth leaving behind, your tenure and your built up networks and whatever else you've accumulated along the way. And so maybe it's a combination of both, but that would really be speculation.
Right. So this is Margaret, and I will add, to that afraid to change. There anecdotally, I will tell you all, back to the little girls and the little boys in the classroom. The little boys raise their hands, and they, even if they don't know the answer, they raise their hands and they say, "Call on me." And the little girls that were like little Margaret knew the answer, but were afraid they were wrong, so they didn't raise their hands. So it's back to starting early and getting those little girls to raise their hands, because those little girls become women who we need to raise their hands. And those women step into their power, they raise their hands, and instead of saying, there's 10 things on the list that you need me to be the next CEO, and I only have 7 of them, therefore I'm not qualified. male counterpart sees I have 5 or 4 of the things on the list, and I'm the guy. So I'm speaking in a very anecdotal, non-data way, Barbara, but these are some of the realities, that we're facing. So I think it would be very interesting, to delve into this in a quantitative way as well, beyond the anecdotes that we see and experience and some of us feel.
Thank you. The next question has to do with the data when you consider ethnicity. This question is, can you say that African American women are really doing better? How credible is the data when you start to break it down by race or ethnicity? So maybe Dr. Nunery or Barbara?
This is Lee Nunery. I'll take a shot at that. I think the question is actually a good one. I don't know that I would question the credibility of the data. I think it depends upon who responded and what level they're in. But no matter what, it is clear that the number of, in my study at least, the number of men and the types of jobs they held and the levels at which they either terminated their employment or moved on to something else correlates well with the data that's found here. Remember, it's a relative comparison that we're making. It's not absolute. And it could well stem from the number of African-American women who are attending college, the number of African-American men who decide to enter the insurance industry. So it may be a matter of sheer numbers, but also in terms of who decides to stay and where they go and where their opportunities are. So I wouldn't get stuck on too much on one factor. It is clear that, especially given the historical perspective, that African Americans have participated in the insurance industry going all the way back to 1693. That's the earliest evidence I found. So it's centuries. But in terms of total participation, it's still low. And also in terms of the type of work that's being done, it does look as though African American women are doing relatively better.
I'll just add on to that to say we did look at ethnicity across the population that contributed information, and so we looked at multiple ethnic groups, and the only one that I would say we probably didn't have enough data to really feel solidly about our answers was in the Pacific Islander group. Other than that, we felt that we had enough information to give statistical credibility to the information that we observed.
Thank you. Barbara, could you please share sort of what the sample size looked like?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we had 30,000. The population represented in the survey was 30,000 people. So it's definitely big enough to be statistically credible. To Margaret's point, we would love to see more participation in the survey in the future. This was our first attempt, and it, I want to praise everybody that did participate, because there's a certain amount of leap of faith to say, all right, I'm going to make all of this information public, even in this sort of big picture kind of manner. So it takes a certain amount of courage, and I do admire all the companies that did agree to respond to the survey, and I would encourage all the rest of you to get on board.
Thank you. Also regarding the data, there are some questions about if we will be looking at other races and ethnicities outside of African American, the way that we shared that data as compared to the white data. Thank you.
Yeah, we do. So we did look at multiple groups. So we looked at Hispanics, we looked at Asians, we've looked at Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and I think there was another group which I can't recall off the top of my head. So a lot of the standard kinds of groupings that you would get in any kind of standard survey, to determine what the ethnic groupings are. And what we found, and one of the reasons that we didn't go through it a lot on this webinar today, is because in every grouping, really, I already called out Pacific Islanders as potentially not being credible enough, but every single grouping showed the exact same patterns as the white pattern. So there was very, very little variation between whites and all other ethnic groups. And what we thought was really interesting was the way the Black women seemed to be doing better. And that is one of the biggest reasons why we called that grouping out specifically today.
Thank you. In the short term, there are a couple of questions as for what influencers in the insurance industry can do right now to draw attention to this issue, to these issues, and make inclusion and equality a reality.
This is Catherine. I think that once you've seen this data and had a chance to digest it, the best thing that we can do is amplify it, is to share it. When we get this webinar finalized and we have our infographic ready to go, we're giving that to you so that you can share this information with your colleagues, with your boss, with your staff. So people realize there is an initiative underway and we all want to participate in making it successful.
I couldn't agree more with Catherine. This is, to Dr. Nunery's point, this is about personal accountability. I would tell and ask shamelessly all of you, please share this. Please share it with one person. Share it with 10 people. Put it on, LinkedIn. Get the word out and talk about it. If you're interested in us sharing additional data insights with your groups, invite us. We will come. There's an action-oriented movement right here. And we have champions and supporters, influencers, really all of us are influencers. And we need the men, the women, the men and women of color. We need the students, we need the educators, we need the parents, we need everyone jumping on our great bandwagon. So please, don't think something is too small. Take that step and let's help each other step into our own power, as I like to say.
And also, once you're armed with all of this material, it's okay to start to mentor. It's okay to sponsor a woman of any color so that they have the opportunities to move forward, to see how to advance in their career. We need to encourage our women colleagues to move forward. I encourage you all to do that.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, these slides, this recording, and the related infographic will all be sent around in an email later this week, but the infographic will be available as soon as this call concludes on the Women in Insurance website. And if you could just click to the next slide for us quickly, or just leave it there, you'll see the Women in Insurance website link right there. We do have some more questions. So there are questions as to whether women are not advancing because they're not interested or because they don't have opportunities. Would just love anyone's insight into that question.
I think there are opportunities. I think that women need to work on their confidence a little bit and step forward and raise their hand. I think they need sponsors. Other women need to sponsor and mentor and make sure that there are specific career paths in our industry. So women who are entering, who are excited, who see our business as a sexy business, we want to make sure that they have opportunities. We want to sponsor them. We want to make sure that the doors are open so that they can see what additional opportunities are available to them. I think it's incumbent upon us to share this information to make that happen.
Absolutely, Catherine. I think, and I know there are opportunities, and it is incumbent on all of us, men and women, to support, to mentor, to be that executive sponsor. And, you know, as a woman, what I would tell you, some of my best mentors have been men. So having that male perspective really does make a difference. If we are looking for a game changer, I'd like to say that might be it. The male executive sponsor, the male mentor for the female really does make a difference. And again, don't have any empirical data on that yet, Barbara, but I do think that it's an area that we should look into for 2.0.
Margaret, Catherine, this is Lee Nunery. Let me just jump in there very quickly. One of the things that I've also recommended as a result of the study and having post-study presentations is that this one topic is very appropriate for the ERGs and BRGs in every company. So beyond the social and maybe cultural need to connect and stay together, promoting each other, building up confidence, testing each other out on technical skills, that's exactly what those internal or external organizations like NIA, LIA, et cetera, should be doing. There's a lot of rich knowledge that can be transferred from one member to another. And there is knowledge about how the company works. You know, is that person a good manager before I apply for that particular position? So I would encourage everyone also to think about how they can use the tools and vehicles that already exist to their fullest extent beyond what is a kind of a first Maslowian need for safety and security. Now let's look at how do we use those organizations and associations to promote a bigger and broader cause.
Thank you so much, Lee. Another thing that I want to share, you know, as a number of folks are adding about opportunities for their own advancement or supporting other women or just creating opportunities in the industry in general. First of all, please feel free to use the email address on this slide to send your ideas and your thoughts. Another piece, as Margaret shared, is that the Women in Insurance Initiative will be spending a considerable amount of time in the coming year meeting with folks across the country. As she said, we would welcome the opportunity to come on site to your company, or if you want to host a regional gathering, because what we would love to do is hear from folks as to what is working in this space and identify where there are gaps. Because at Women in Insurance, as Margaret implied, or actually directly stated, it's not just about drawing attention to this issue. We want to identify opportunities to make the insurance industry a really desirable industry for women. And that means we want to put forth solutions. So not only do we want to hear from you about what practices are working in your company or have worked for you individually, but we also want you to help us identify the gaps and generate solutions. And there are multiple ways that you can engage with the Women in Insurance Initiative, individually, as a mentor, as a company, you could become an official member. There are a lot of different ways to explore this. And please know that we are not pretending to have all of the answers. We need you and your support and your insight to make this happen together. So with that, I will say one more time that it has just been a true honor and a pleasure to have everyone on this webinar today. I feel like we have tremendous momentum and leadership, not only folks on this call, but leading this call, but the folks who are attending this call. We are so grateful to have you join us today. All of the questions that were submitted will be responded to in writing in the follow-up. So please don't feel that if your question wasn't answered, that it is being ignored. With that, Margaret, any closing remarks?
Amy, that was a perfect close. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership. And giving us this opportunity. We are making history, we are making the difference, and we are stepping into our power. And Catherine, I'm going to leave the last word to you because you say it so well. Catherine, what do you always say?
Oh, Margaret, you know, insurance is a sexy business for women. Let's make it happen for all of us.
Nobody says it better than Catherine. Thank you all for being with us today. Let's go out there and make it sexy. Bye-bye.